Bethlehem on Broad Street really came to our church 27 years ago, but it really, this year, is 30 years old. And it started over at St. Lawrence Haven, which is at the Holy Cross Church over at 5th and Rich Street. Every day they were packing bags of food that came from the Santa Sea, where they put into the machines, and the leftovers they would bring there. And Ralph Emmerich and Jim Bateson and were there when a lady said, what's going to happen on Christmas? Are you going to be open? And Ralph and Jim looked at each other, and they said, well, we'll see what we can do about it. So they went, Ralph went to the bishop, and they got $200 or so. And in the dining room of the Holy Cross school, they started it with about 50 people coming.
You know, there's plenty of things that I could talk about my father, but being one of two sons and growing up in the south end of Columbus, the one thing that I know that I could repeat easily is the fact how courageous he was, because he essentially walked the talk. He talked the talk, but he could walk the talk.
He surely did.
And I just know there were probably a few people that might have snickered or sneered when it would see him coming, but at the same time, it made him even stronger in his faith. And it showed that, you know, the reason I say he's courageous is because it didn't matter what group he was going to meet with or what the event was, or even maybe some of the danger that he might have been going into. He just knew he was with the Holy Spirit, and God was his co-pilot, as I heard him say many, many times, and that the Lord would provide. So he had an unshakable belief, an unshakable confidence that everything was going to be just fine, and it always was. But as his son, I got to know him as a father and someone I had to answer to if I got in a little trouble at school or whatever, and never heard him cuss, never saw him drink, never saw him smoke a cigarette. So again, he walked the talk, and yet when I would go out in public with him, he would put on something like this. And anybody that knew my dad might see him wearing this. And I've been keeping that, and I've got a few other nice mementos. And if you think about it, in today's standards with all the t-shirts and all the commercials and all the internet and Facebook and YouTube and everything, how courageous would a person be to be walking around the street with something like this? So to me, that's just another mark on what set him apart, because he could care less.
I wrote a little something about my father, Jim Bateson. Someone said once that he wasn't a Christian until on his deathbed, when they led him to the Lord. And I'm sorry to say, but they didn't truly know my father, because he was a Christian from a very young age. You know, my father's dream and vision, along with Ralph and all those that served, was not just to serve food, but also to introduce Christ to these people. Because my dad always said, and even on his tombstone it says, with God all things are possible. He was actually a custodian at St. Matthew's in Gehenna, but he served at St. Michael's for many, many years, so he had both parishes that he would go in front of. In fact, I've got many of his speeches that he wrote asking for donations and money, and also in food. And I remember one year we had an abundance amount of turkeys that were given.
Right.
Yeah. I remember the first Bethlehem on Broad Street, as we anticipated his return home, because we weren't able to open gifts or have dinner until Dad was there. And I, being younger, of course, when he got there, I was ready to scold him. But when he walked in the house, he was so full of joy and so full of love of the day that I couldn't scold him. And I began to listen to his stories, because he had story after story but the one where he said someone came up to him and asked for $1 for the bus, and he started passing out dollar bills, and he ran out of money, and he started asking others to give money, and they did, and everybody was joyful in doing that.
Within about the third year, Bill Clark, who was one of our interim ministers, remember, came and asked 10 days before Christmas if we could have it in our parish hall. Remember? And it was around here, you don't do things, you have to go through committees. And so I imagine, yes, I was probably the mission commissioner, so I had a little bit of, you know. And so Becky and some of us, very few women, it was all these men that were in charge over there at St. Lawrence the first year. And they set up just the parish hall, and they had a place where they had the men just sitting like they were at a bus stop. And it was very, and smoking, and we were really quite anxious about, weren't we, Becky?
Yes, smoking in the church.
So,
I think we can also look, as Arlene explained, how this began at St. Lawrence Haven over at the Cum Christo Center of Holy Cross Church, which is a few blocks away, and how it grew so big they needed a place to come, and as she said, Reverend Bill Clark at the time kind of said yes before checking with anyone at the church that of course we would want to do this, and then we had to scramble to try to see how we were going to do it. And it was just a great experience for us, because not only was there food and gifts, but the food had to be on plates, not paper plates. They had to be on china plates, and there had to be flowers. There had to be the full banquet and dinner. And the presents, as we were explaining, they have to be wrapped. They can't just be given out convenient, efficiently. They all need to be wrapped so people understood it. There was phone calls that you could make, free phone calls anywhere in the United States. And so people were able to connect with family members they hadn't talked to in 5 or 10 years. And it wasn't just that, they needed the courage to be able to call that family member.
right.
Because there may have been reasons why they hadn't talked for 5 or 10 years. And so holding their hands while they're making those calls was important as well. So it has many unique experiences to it. Mady Janata was another minister of our church, although a lay leader and a professor on interfaith and interdiscipline programs at OSU. She was asked to give a sermon soon after Bethlehem on Broad Street, and she talked about it. In her sermon, she said it was a feast for a king. And it reminded her as if we had created Bethlehem on Broad Street. And that is where we got the name. It was from her sermon. And so we appreciated everybody's contribution in one way or the other.